he's going to compliment you the entire time. He might be a little fresh.
The keystone in the arch of Star Wars.
But, you know, I'm not going to say no to George Lucas.
Right. Sorry, I'm getting like emotional.
And he's got this hulking, scary dude with the big nose and the perfect hair.
I understand. This is a safe space. This is a safe space between you and I and all of your viewers.
Cassie and Jim on the beach, and people are like, no. I can literally hear people go, no.
Rogue One was awesome. I love the Han Solo movie, and then of course I love The Mandalorian.
And like getting to talk to fans face to face and learn their names and just, you know, get to hear their stories.
And in the world of Star Wars, there's a bunch of people who look different and are different species. There's lizard men. There's psychic baby swamp monsters.
I joke that the best thing about writing Princess Leia is everybody knows who she is, and the worst thing about writing Princess Leia is everyone knows who she is.
And also you get Ewoks, and I am definitely a lover of Ewoks.
You're listening to Around the Galaxy.
Yes, it's a good thing. It's a great thing.
Well, welcome to Around the Galaxy, the Star Wars fan talk show. I am your host, Pete Fletzer. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. If you're joining us live in our chat, thank you so much for being a patron and being a part of the show. And if you're catching this later on the audio replay, thanks for checking us out. We definitely appreciate it. If you are new, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, rate, and review it, all that stuff you're supposed to do if you have a podcast. I'm supposed to ask you to do all those things. So please do those things. I definitely appreciate it. And if you're a return visitor, well, you know the drill. Every single week I have the opportunity to talk to a different type of Star Wars fan, whether it's an author or a podcaster or a creator of some sort, or in this case, I am privileged to have an actor, a gentleman named Kenin Elias-Reyes. I'm sure I screwed up his name, and I apologize for that, but I'm going to bring him in 1 second to explain why I have so many letters and words to say there. But Sean is an actor and a voice actor. If you are wondering what the Star Wars connection is, if you listen to From a Certain Point of View, The Empire Strikes Back, he was the voice of Fake It Till You Make It, the Kevin Scott story featuring Jaxxon. He is also read Star Wars Death Troopers, and he is the voice of 000 in the Aphra audio drama, among other things. It is my pleasure to introduce Sean Kenin. Sean, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
I can't complain, man. It's I have the opportunity to talk to somebody about Star Wars. What else could I ask for?
What's better than that? Come on.
So, Sean, for the people who may not know you, give us a little bit of introduction.
I am a voice actor.
Mm-hmm.
And I've, I do a lot of animation, children's animation. I work on a show called Casa Grandes for Nickelodeon, and I've done some stuff for Disney Plus that's coming up in 2022. And I play Tiny Tom Cruise on The Family Guy. I've done a lot of Star Wars audiobooks. My first one was actually Death Troopers, which was a super cool, zombie crossover Han Solo book.
Yeah.
That was really fun to work on. I've done some weird things. Like I was many of the voices of the Princess Bride on the Princess Bride 20th anniversary DVD and video game.
Oh wow!
It's there's some fun stuff out there that I've voiced, and none of it has made a name for me. I'm still in obscurity. It's amazing how I can just hold on to obscurity.
Well, it's interesting because I think there's this. I even find it from a podcasting perspective. There's sometimes this perception, honestly, that hey, if you have a podcast or you're a voice actor or whatever, you're like you're not. You're getting calls every day because people want you, but the reality is you're out there. You got to. I don't care who you are. I mean, you have to be scrapping out there, and that's caused you to get creative with how you're doing this, right?
Absolutely. I have a booth in my house, which is actually being used by my daughter right now, who's doing a high school performance in our dining room. It's interesting. I mean, voiceover is something that came along. I've been pursuing musical theater and then TV and film here in New York, and met my wife, and we got married and had 2 kids, and I was like, I gotta find a way to make some money as an actor. because I wasn't. And I had started this recording studio with a friend of mine who I had met at musical theater school. At the time, it was called Shut Up and Talk, and we trained people to be actors, and we still do that on the side. But it was it's now a place called Hyperbolic Audio, and while we were building that, my business partner was Jake Morgendorfer on Daria. Back in the 90s, and he was like, I don't want to work for anybody else, maybe we can build something. And I was like, well, I got a closet, maybe we can make a recording studio. And we did, and that was 20 years ago. And now we have a 4-room facility, and we work with DreamWorks Animation, feature animation and television animation, Nickelodeon, all these incredible productions, and while we were building that, I was like, well, I'll just start pursuing voiceover. And weirdly realized that all the voices I was doing as a kid and practicing as a kid, and all the stories I was telling and trying to imitate family members who are from other countries and, get accents down, gave me a real proclivity for it. So I ended up going into voiceover and kind of making money, which was surreal for me as an actor at a certain point. I was like, wait a minute, what? You want to pay me to do this? And once that started, that was pretty fun. I found that it was a place where I could break out of stereotypes. I could break out of what people saw me, how people saw me. I have this Hispanic last name, Elias-Reyes. My father's from El Salvador, but my mother's family's, Western European, and, my father's family, Central American. And I took my wife's name professionally. So I was Sean Kenin for a long time.
Right.
And I built my career as Sean Kenin. And then my father passed during COVID, which is sad. And I was like, I want to bring that back in. And so I decided to be this long named actor, like one of those people with one of those names that like everybody just is like, oh God, I got to say this. This is like 4 words here. So voiceover was the place that I ended up, and it's surreal, man. I feel so fortunate to have managed to make eke out a living in this part of the business. It's a really tremendously fun part of the business to be in. You get to play things that people don't see you as when they look at your face, or when they're trying to typecast you like for on camera stuff. So it became a lot of fun, and it's something that I'm super excited to be in.
Do you find that you were saying before about you did voices as a kid and that sort of thing. Do you find that it's voice acting? I was going to ask you broadly, but it's for yourself. Did you find that voice acting is a result of doing impressions, or does impressions sort of part of what you do, or what's the relationship?
What came first, the chicken or the egg? So my father's from El Salvador. I have a grandmother who was of Irish descent, and we moved from Indiana to outside of Chicago, and it was like, so all these accents were sort of always running around my head, and I would do impressions of people, and then I was a big fan of the Muppets when I was a kid, and a big fan of Star Wars, and a big fan of Looney Tunes, and so I would imitate all these cartoon characters that I would see, and just sit in my room and practice doing voices. And it became something that I guess I got really good at, because I had friends who would ask me to do voices, and I had friends who would ask me to call people with these crazy voices, and I had completely forgotten about that by the time I came to New York to be an actor. I knew I wanted to do character work. I knew that I enjoyed, I wasn't like kind of a leading man kind of thing, and so I was like, I want to be a character actor, and that seemed kind of more my speed, doing accents and doing like, crazy, wacky characters. But when voiceover came along, and all of a sudden somebody just called me one day and was like, hey, do you do a good Billy Crystal? And I was like, I don't know, I've never tried. And I was watching a couple things, and I'm like sitting there on my, sitting there in like my small apartment going, hello. I could probably do Billy Crystal. Yeah, hello. I would sit there, and I was like, I would start working on things, and I was like, Yeah, I probably can. And I called, it was back when you would like call a phone number and leave a message for your audition, just improvise something.
Yep.
And I called them and left a message as Billy Crystal, and they were like, well, they'd like to hire you for this thing, for this animated thing. And I was like, oh, great, cool. And as I started getting more and more into that, I started doing more and more like mimicking of people for films. And it's kind of a wild part of the business to be in, because what they'll do is they'll send you a little clip, and if you can mimic that, can you say this other line that the actor is not available to say? Can you do that? We need to slug it in for a trailer, or we need to slug it in for television, or we need to do something, and that person's unavailable. So it became this kind of weird part of the business to kind of get into, which is fun and cool, and nobody knows about.
Right. Well, it's funny. On your website, I was looking at a bunch of the work you've done, and I mean, it's interesting to say the thing about and I think again, voice acting. I think people believe because so often animated features, they feature big name celebrity voice, and as a voice actor, I'd like to ask you in a moment about how that affects you, like how you look at that. But I think people forget the voice acting is all those sort of things, like the Super Bowl commercial where you did 1 or 2 lines of Mr. Brady for a commercial that I honestly, it was so damn good. I had no idea that it wasn't whatever the guy's name is who played Mr. Brady. But
I mean, it is weird. And it's something that especially, as an actor, it's like, it gets weird to like ask people to let you audition for things. It's a funny part. It's a funny part of the business because, of course, everybody wants to be an actor. Everybody has this idea that everybody wants to be an actor, and that there's a lot of people who are asking to, people to give them a chance. And, it's about being able to nail it when somebody does give you that chance.
Right.
So when I started, doing more and more auditions and getting to know people, that's when I could finally start saying, hey, give me a shot at this. Let me try this. And when that happens and you can, deliver, it's tremendous. But right. it takes a while to get there. I mean, and it's so funny because you'd be surprised how often like celebrities will write a letter and say, hey, can you give me a chance to try something new? And everybody does it from the bottom all the way to the top. It's just obviously when you're at the top, it's like everybody's like, okay, Tom Cruise, we'll give you a chance to do whatever you want.
Right.
Yeah. You think you can be a rock star? Be a rock star. We're gonna put you in this rock musical. You know what I mean? It's like so it's interesting. And I asked to audition for that because I was like, I think I can do a good Mr. Brady. I'd like to give that a shot. And then weird things happen, right? Like, especially when you're not like famous. I went into the demo to record that, and they were like, it's just amazing how well you do the voice. I'm like, oh, well, cool, thanks. She's like, we did a casting all across the country. You were part of like the last casting, and I had asked to audition for it, and they were like, but you just nailed it. And I was like, oh, thanks. And then they did the demo, and then they held another batch of casting. They were like, can we get some improv artists? Can we get some names in there? And they asked the guy who did the movie of the Brady Bunch to audition for it, right? And it just didn't match. Because mimicking is a different thing than an impression, right? Like comedians do a lot of impressions. It's very funny that they do a caricature of a person's voice,
right?
But a mimic has to try and get the person's note, intonation, and delivery with it, like while matching the flaps of their mouth, right?
Yep.
And so it's a very specific thing, and it's like I can't go up on stage and tell jokes and be a person. But I can say these 4 words as that person for this movie. You know what I mean? It's such a weird thing. And so they held another casting, and then I came back, and that casting didn't go anywhere. And they asked me to come back and record the actual commercial. And they were like, "Yeah, like you were just so good." And I was like, "I know the casting director, and I know you held a whole other round of casting. If it was so good, why spend $2,500 in like 3 different major metropolitan areas to hold another casting? I don't understand." Right. But it's funny. It's the business is like that. It's like they just assume there's got to be something better. right? It's
yeah. And it's interesting too that you say that, the mimicking is very different than impressions. A couple of weeks ago, I had Kevin Cabral on the show, and he's this TikTok guy who does Star Wars impressions, and he nails them. And we talked a lot about it's more about finding something about the character, and I imagine that's different than from what you're looking for, because you're trying to sound like and match. You're not trying to, as you said, you're not trying to create a caricature of it. You're trying to match it. How did you manage the tiny Tom Cruise from Family Guy? For those who don't know, because Family Guy goes a little caricature, but at the same time, you have to believe it's Tom Cruise's voice.
Yeah, well, God, that's so crazy, because that was something where the way I locked into that, I have this really, it's funny. I have a laugh where I laugh hysterically and clap, right? And it's very similar to what what actual Tom Cruise does.
Who's also tiny. I mean, right?
Yeah, he'll talk really intensely about something, and like he'll get like really intense, and he has this intensity about him that my intensity is a little more goofy and a little more ridiculous. So if I get really intense and I kind of like, hey Stewie, but then they said the thing that nailed it in the audition for them. And this wasn't even a line that they had in the audition, but at one point I said some line and I clapped my hands in the booth and I was like, yeah, man, that's it. And they were like, that just won it for us. It was like that one thing that he does in when he's excited about something, that just got it. And so that's what got me the audition. It wasn't even necessarily that I was the most amazing Tom Cruise impression that they heard.
Right.
It was just that they really liked the intensity with the sporadic, like insane laughter out of nowhere.
That's great.
Yeah.
So who's some of your favorite actors to mimic and to because yeah.
God, I love accents. So when I was a kid, I always loved doing like Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? The sort of northern, almost Liverpudlian voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi when I was younger. But the one that gets me, because it was one of those things where I was like, I don't even think I can do this one, right? Like I had gotten an audition for John C. Reilly voice match, and I was like, how do you even do that voice? Yeah. It's weird. It's like, I was like, oh, I was like, oh, he's got kind of a, and like, I was like, something back here in the throat. Oh, okay, yeah, and I was like, this is weird. Like, oh, all right, well, yeah, and like, I started, yeah, all right, yeah, okay, yeah. Now I feel like I got it, yeah. And it was one of those things where like you lock onto something. There's something that they do that all of a sudden you go, all right, yeah. I feel like I got the voice a little bit, It's like it's kind of all over the place, and it's like, but it's really excited about a lot of things, and yeah, it's like you start to lock into like their personality. And there are people who like do this. This is their whole life. Like Jim Metzgerman, is just an amazing mimic, impressionist. And it's funny because you watch these other people when you're building a person's voice. It's fascinating how often you watch the person, but also watch people who mimic the person, because you start to go, oh, that's the thing they locked into. That's like these are the things that they kind of lock into, and so it kind of helps you a little bit.
Yeah, that's great. That John C. Again, like you said, when you said I do John C. Reilly, my first thought was how, like, what's this going to be? And then it was like he was there.
That was one of those things. It is hilarious how you do this stuff, and how this is. I fell in love with acting to be on stage, to be like in front of an audience, doing musical theater, right? And how solo this is, right?
Right.
Like this is. You go into a booth and you like listen to headphones. You have headphones on because you can't really hear your voice exactly until you hear them on headphones.
Right.
And so you have headphones on. And you're like, oh yeah, oh, that's weird. Yeah, and you're like doing this, and then when you get it, you're like, I think I got it. This is great. And like then I start like going around the house, like like talking to my wife and my son, like, hey honey, what do you want for dinner? I think I want tacos. Tacos sound great. Like you start to do all these things where you're like you start doing voices. My family hates that, by the way. Like at a certain point it's like that, stop. Please.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I've been watching Bad Batch, the Star Wars animated show lately, and I've just been saying everything like the little girl Omega and just throwing a really bad Kiwi accent and everything I say. And my kids just want to throw things at me when I start doing that. So I get it, and I'm not even a pro at it. So which is probably why they want to throw things at me, because they're like, it's just stop, Dad, that's not you.
It is funny though, because like so my whole family acts.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife and I like to do voices for each other all the time. It's kind of how when we started dating, we started doing voices. But and our kids will get into it every once in a while. But when they were young, I would read things out loud to them. Actually, side story. My wife and I had some differing ideas about what age kids had to be before they saw Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh well, I mean 3. And she was like, no. So my son was 3, my daughter was 5, and I was like, I really would love to show them the movies, and they were like, and she was like, no. She's like, but they love you reading stories to them at night, like maybe we can get a book or something like that. And I was like, actually, you know what? Every once in a while, my kids would be like, can you put down the book? Can you just tell me a story? Can you make up a story?
Yeah.
And my wife's a great improviser on the spot like that. I'm a little more like, I don't know if I can make up a story on the spot. And so like all of a sudden my game changed. Like as far as they were concerned, he makes up the best stories, because I started telling it to them as like a nightly sort of like story that you pass on from one generation to the other. And it's beautiful that way, because wherever you stop, you can pick up the next day with A Long Time Ago in a Galaxy Far, Far Away, right? And so, like, if you only get to the cantina scene, or if you only get to, Uncle Owen's place in Aunt Beru, and you just meet Luke for the first time that night, the next night, you can pick back up where you left off. And so I told my kids the first 3 movies, and I consider that Star Wars: A New Hope through Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
The first 3 movies just as a tale. Yeah. Over like 3 months, it like took me
that's amazing,
and I was like I was getting in deep, right? And they were so into it that Halloween they wanted to go as Luke and Leia, not because they'd seen anything,
right,
but because they had heard the story that I had told at night, right? And that's amazing. That was one of those moments as a fan where I was just like, oh.
Yeah,
I'm so in love with my kids right now. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
They're eating this up. I'm loving this. This is awesome. Right?
It's interesting too, because it's funny, Star Wars as a modern myth, and I'm 50, so I saw Star Wars when I was 7 years old in the theater. It's been with me. I have young kids, 8.
Too, my friend.
Yeah, so we were there. We're the old school. But the my kids are 8 and 11, and it's interesting to watch them come into Star Wars through different doorways. So when you finally, like, my son has come in through the animated shows, and he's a Clone Wars kid. He loves that series. My daughter started with Rey and The Force Awakens. That was her Star Wars entry. So when you finally showed your kids the films, how did they react to that?
Well, they really, it is funny being such a huge fan and being so affected by them. I mean, in many ways, my whole life is from Star Wars. I came to New York I decided to be an actor by watching Star Wars. I came to New York to be an actor. I met my wife because I was acting in a show that she was acting in. It's like all of this flows from Star Wars, which is crazy. Yeah. And so I have such a connection to it that, you let your kids watch the show and watch the movie, and you're like, God, I hope they love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. I really hope they love it. And they do love it. Not as much as I did. Right. They appreciate my love of it. But they got into it. They really got into it, and we see all the movies together that they go with me to see the movies. My son's a little more of a Marvel kid. Like, he's a little more of a comic book kid.
Yeah.
But he still appreciates, he absolutely ate up The Mandalorian.
Yeah.
My daughter, as she got older, really appreciated Kylo Ren. You know, like it was hilarious sitting next to her when she was like 13, and we're like watching, you know, we're watching The Force Awakens, and you know, in a movie theater,
right?
And she's sitting next to me, and she's like, you know, 13, she's still very young, and he takes off the mask for the first time.
Yeah.
And I hear her in her little tiny 13-year-old girl voice. She goes, "Oh."
There's been an awakening. Have you felt it? Oh my gosh.
The Force has awakened. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, they've been on this journey with me in this kind of great way, and they know how much I love it. You know, I have a Millennium Falcon belt buckle that I wear every single day. I have a you know, my jacket, the jacket that I wear in the spring and the fall is a replica, you know, Empire Strikes Back Han Solo jacket, right? It's like I'm wearing the belt buckle right now. I don't want to get weird, but you know,
that's awesome.
It's just, you know, it's part of me, you know.
Yeah.
And as I'm sure you can relate,
sure.
You know, and so it's I think they have a reverence to it because it's Dad's, you know, first love in some respects.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because again, you know, since we're in similar age brackets, it's funny because when we were kids, Star Wars, because there was no internet, because there was no mass media, you know, streaming media, etc. Like Star Wars was this special club that me and like 2 or 3 of my friends had. Like we were like, we felt we were the biggest Star Wars fans in the world. Nobody else liked Star Wars like we did. And now it's interesting as we, you know, geez, I have a podcast. I have hundreds of people listen to me talk about Star Wars every couple of weeks. But it's interesting because it is so, it's like this recognition and this realization that it really is so big. I mean, I was writing for Star Wars Galaxy magazine in the 90s. Amazing. I was a freelance writer. It was so much fun. And honestly, I didn't appreciate it because, again, somewhere in my head, it was still, well, this is my thing, right? Other people like Star Wars, but Star Wars is my thing. And then I started expanding the podcast and having conversations with people and talking to people that I admired. And they were like, oh, you wrote for that? I waited for that magazine every single, you know, every quarter when it came out because that was my Star Wars news. And so there is this love. And to your point, sharing it with your kids is so wild and so interesting to see how they take to it. And like you said, I hope my you know, my daughter's kind of into it. She kind of puts up with it. You know, she's at that age where she's like, whatever, Dad. But my son still, you know, on Friday mornings when Bad Batch comes out or Clone Wars or Mandalorian, like that's our thing. We hang out, we watch the show, which is just so wild to me, you know, because my father introduced me to it. And that's kind of.
It's so funny. You know, I actually had this idea, and right when the pandemic hit on, I had rented a theater space, and I had a couple comedians and a couple people just that I've worked with on various different projects. And on May the 4th at this bar around the corner from my house, I was going to do this thing called My Star Wars Story. And it was going to be, you know, these comedians and these, like, you know, these people that I know just telling their Star Wars story, right? Like what brought them to the universe? What is the universe meant to them? You know, very much what you do here, I think, you know?
Yep.
And, but on stage and like, you know, hopefully, you know, funny or entertaining in some way, almost like a moth, you know, the moth, but with Star Wars, right?
Yeah.
And, because I find that so interesting. Star Wars has affected people in such unique and moving ways, right? It's I mean, it's a fandom, of course. You know, a lot of us, you know, will go to these conventions. We want to, you know, see these, you know, heroes that we had as a kid. We want to collect the things, but outside of that, it's a very functional fandom. In many respects, you see people who are creating things from that fandom. You know what I mean? It's like they're making Around the Galaxy, you know, podcast. They're making, you know, I have a friend who is a writer. His name is Matthew Freeman. He's a playwright, and he's an excellent playwright. Writes some really like wild, out of the world stuff. And he and I are going to be working on a project together that we did way back in 2001, literally 20 years ago, called The Death of King Arthur, and it's a Shakespearean version of King Arthur. It's in verse, it's in iambic pentameter, and
Oh wow.
really beautiful. And it came out, we did it with helicopters flying overhead after 9/11 in Central Park, you know, and but he and I were roommates, and he would go to sleep with the Star Wars movies on every night, right? And he still watches them all almost religiously. Like it's his security blanket. It's the way he de-stresses. It's the way he centers himself, right? Now his writing is like influenced by absurdity and like and he experiments with with sometimes with just tone poems, right? And does some really incredible stuff that has nothing to do with science fiction, has nothing to do with Star Wars, has nothing to do with anything else. But that's the thing that kind of we connected on, was this love of Star Wars, right?
Right.
And it's wild to think about, you know, how sometimes people make something of it, but sometimes it's just something that kind of sits in the background. And I introduced it. I remember when I found out how deep he was in it, I introduced him to a friend of mine who's actually a voice actor in LA, a guy named Darren DePaul. He was in a video game. He played a oh shoot, I'm not going to remember the character. There was a video game with like this cloaked, bearded character. It just came out a few years ago. Darren DePaul has done a few things in the Star Wars universe as well. A tremendously talented voice actor, very good friend of mine. But I ended up introducing them because they both had rows and rows of Star Wars action figures on their on their bedroom, dressers.
Right.
And I was like, you guys have got to meet. You know what I mean? But because you always find it out in this interesting way. You have this closet that I'm sure, like, people are like, oh my god, look at this. It's just funny.
You're 100% right, and it's funny you say that too, because there's like there's a shame is the wrong word, but this sort of kind of hidden in many cases, like there's a Star Wars sort of part of you that it kind of leaks out sometimes, right? And it's so very, this is more amusing to me than probably my listeners, but I was very fortunate to on Good Morning America on May the 4th, my question, a video question, was used to ask a question of Dave Filoni. So I was on Good Morning America, and wow, I mean, that was, but I forgot, like, I knew all my Star Wars friends and Twitter and the 4,000 people who follow me and keep up with the show were watching and could catch it, because I was like, hey, I was on Good Morning America. But other than that, like, amazing. They knew. But later that day, I'm getting, my non-Star Wars world, which is generally like Facebook and other things I'm involved in. People are like, I saw you on Good Morning America this morning. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. And because to me, my Star Wars world is here, it's compartmentalized here. Sure. But on the other hand, everybody knows me as the Star Wars guy, because it has leaked out in those different areas. And you're probably the same, and your friends are probably the same, where there's, people think of you as, yeah, you're Sean, but Sean's that guy who loves Star Wars.
Yeah, it is interesting. It's been this through line in my life that I mean, obviously I've done a lot of projects that have nothing to do with Star Wars, and but then whenever I get a chance to come back to it, whenever I get a chance to do something new or to work on some new project that has anything to do with Star Wars, there's this realization that that this is where it all began. And look, I think. It's funny how some fandoms do come with a certain amount of, I guess, and you're right. Shame is the wrong word, but it's something somebody else puts on us. It's not necessarily.
Right. Yeah.
You're almost a little embarrassed to admit it, but
right.
But then when you do, you go, wait a minute. This is the thing that makes me me. This is the thing that I love. But that exists for people for sports. That exists for people for all sorts of things, right? Yeah. It's like it is whatever drives you to create. It's whatever drives you to make something or to be a certain type of person. I know from my friend Matt Freeman, he's like, these are morality tales, and I just saw myself as Luke Skywalker, and I always wanted to be like that. I wanted to be an honorable person. I wanted to be a good person. And you go like, yeah, like it's that kind of a thing. It's like these stories, they mean something to us because of how they affect us and how they make us see the world, and I think that's kind of a great thing, right?
Yeah, and I 100%, and I think it's interesting too because you're right. There is sort of this, we keep it sort of undercover a little bit, but as soon as the armor is cracked a little bit, and two people recognize that they have this connection, it's like your old brothers, your old family. You've known each other for years because you jump right in. I told the story not too long ago. I went to my chiropractor and I was wearing one of my Around the Galaxy t-shirts, and he's like, "Hey, I like your shirt." And he's like, I love Star Wars. And now every time I go, we spend time. He's like, "Let me ask you, what's your theory on how Obi-Wan was able to beat Darth Maul?" And it's like, this is great.
Yeah,
I love this. And now this is a connection. And my wife is like, "You can't wait to go see the chiropractor because you're going to geek out about Star Wars." I'm like, yeah, well, and my back's a little, out of alignment, but it'd be great but it's that connection, additional connection that we have, which is very interesting.
It's funny that you say that. My wife, she works in arts administration as well, and she works at this major university, the New School here in New York.
Oh yeah.
And they have tech support people, and she's like, tech support people are very hard to get through to. She's like, I've been trying to connect with this guy for years, and my wife and I have this, ongoing debate, like Star Wars or Empire Strikes Back, right? Which one is the better movie? And I'm like, well, Star Wars. If you have a movie that's standing on its own, sure, Star Wars. And she's like, well, that's the one I think. And I'm like, well, it's Empire Strikes Back is a far better, like structurally sound, like dramatic story, right? Mm-hmm. It just is beautifully crafted, and I'm like, so it's the best one, and she's like, no, it's the first one because it can stand on its own. I'm like, no, that's not the point. Like, so we'll have this like constant back and forth, and she goes, I finally got through to the tech guy at the New School because I said that you and I have this ongoing debate about which one is the best movie, and that your opinion is Empire Strikes Back, and he's like, oh, that's interesting. It's Empire, by the way. Right? And now they have this great relationship.
Right. Yep. That barrier's been crossed. That's really right. that's pretty wild.
Yeah, it's kind of great.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the Star Wars voice work that you've done, and your first one, of course, was, as you mentioned, the Death Troopers, which is now it's sort of a classic sort of Star Wars story. But more recently, you did 000 in Aphra, and you read Kevin Scott's story from a certain point of view. So tell me a little bit. First of all, how do you end up in that position? Was this one of those things where you had to ask for it? And let's talk about how you got into that. And then I also want to hear, like, how do you approach voices of characters that don't really have voices officially yet?
Well, it's interesting. I got into it, there was around the same time that I think Mark Thompson got into it. It was the early 2000s, mm-hmm. and they were having auditions just for people to do Star Wars audiobooks, and you had to read some copy. And the beautiful thing about Star Wars audiobooks is that you get to do your impression of those characters, which is mm-hmm. great. Some audiobooks, some audiobooks you work on, and they want you to stay close to your voice. But right. When you're a voice actor who loves doing impressions and loves doing characters and loves doing accents, it becomes something that you're like, okay, I can stay close to my voice, but I'd love to break out and do a different voice, right?
Right.
So I auditioned for it back in the early 2000s, and I ended up booking this Star Wars Death Troopers, and I thought, what a weird, interesting sort of crossover, this idea of zombies in a Star Wars movie, in a Star Wars book. And it's a really cool, dark story. If you ever get a chance to read it, I don't know whether you've read it or not.
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
I love listening to Star Wars audiobooks. I feel like I have a little bit of ADHD myself, and I was never an avid reader. Right. I was when I was very, very young, but then just stopped reading. But audiobooks really, I love audiobooks, and so Star Wars audiobooks, especially because they have the sound effects and the music, and the production quality is just fantastic. Kevin Thompson, who is the producer and director on these things, is just great. He does great service to the universe, both ours and the Star Wars universe. By creating these beautiful soundscapes, and letting people play and pushing them. To the second point about creating a voice, obviously the voices of the characters that exist, we try to get as close as possible, and and we work on those. But when a new voice comes up, you get to play a little bit, and the beautiful sort of relationship between Kevin as a director and the actors is that he's playfully nudging. Like he's one of those guys who like, come on, we can try something different. Let's do this. Let's try that. And I had worked on 000. Not to get too dark here, but right after my father died, 000 came along, and I was pretty wrecked. And a lot had happened in those first couple of months. It was like April of last year, May of last year, and so it came along, and I was like, of course I'd love to be part of this, and I had prepped it, and I was trying some things, and I was like, of course I want an English accent, I want to try these things, and I was thinking almost like, like do I try something vaguely Snapey, for this, but it was rough. It was a tough time working on a project and creating a new character, but that's what's so great about Kevin is that he took my sort of tentativeness at the time. He's like, all right, let's go in that direction. Now try this. Add a little bit of this to it, and we ended up getting there and creating something that people really responded to.
Right.
And I was so thankful for that because it's what I needed. As an artist, you don't always get to work on things that directly relate to what you're going through in your life. And especially if you're working on projects that people call you and ask you to be a part of. Right. But sometimes those projects can really give you an outlet, a place to escape to that is much needed. And thankfully, much needed for everybody else. I mean, we're in the middle of this pandemic, and this thing comes out, and people ate it up and just loved it. And that's a great thing to do too. To be able to be a part of something where people get to escape a little bit. They get to fly to that galaxy far, far away, which this galaxy was kind of a little tough to
it was worth leaving. At this galaxy we wanted to leave. So how did you prepare for Triple? Because to me, first of all, it's an interesting, when I put on my full on Star Wars geek hat here, of course, Doctor Aphra as a character and as a series is really, it's catching a lot of attention, and it's becoming a big fan favorite among people who, it's interesting. There's these sort of layers of Star Wars fans. And for example, when Ahsoka Tano was on The Mandalorian, I reached, which was awesome as a Ahsoka fan, but I did a short interview with my dad. I'll have to find the link and send it to you because I think you'd appreciate it, because I asked him if it mattered, because he had no idea who she was. He had no idea who Bo-Katan was or Ahsoka Tano or I was a big fan of the Chuck Wendig book. So when I saw the Marshall episode, I was like, oh my gosh, they're going there. But I asked my dad, I was like, do you know her backstory? He's like, nope, had no idea. Didn't matter. It was a cool story. And so what's happening with the Aphra stories is it's starting to, like, more and more, like, the people who are on that level slightly above total nerd, like, don't know who she is, but that book and the audio drama has caught a couple people, and I've thought 000 was such a cool character from the first moment I read him in the comic book. What kind of research did you do, or how did you prepare to create that voice? And what did you have? You said you got some direction from Kevin, but what did you bring to it? Was there something that you had in mind when you read the character?
Honestly, it was a very sort of a take on how Alan Rickman might play a C-3PO type character, right? It was sort of back in the throat like this, and vaguely very clipped the way he spoke, and Kevin was like, all right, let's just adjust that a little bit, and maybe give him a little bit of this, and it was. It's funny, as you're reading it, you're kind of reading it in a few different voices because you're trying to have options when you show up on the day, because you may get there and you're like, this is a new character, so I don't know, what to do here, but Kevin does this great thing, and he does it not just with characters that you're doing new voices with, but also characters that exist in the movies, right? And he's like, he's like, look, I love having people who can do voices from the movies, and that's great because that's the way a lot of people experience these things, these stories. But he's like, we're imagining that this universe is, we're telling the story of the characters who are in this universe, and we're telling it in this book. And this book is a particular version of those characters in this universe. Imagine if the characters were real and they were played by these actors in movies and played by these actors in books. And that's the idea, is that you're allowed to give a little bit of your own take because this is Han Solo is a real person that is portrayed by Harrison Ford over here and Mark Thompson over here and Sean Kennan over here. You know what I mean? It's like, it's once you start opening yourself up to that idea, you go, oh, like, of course I want to try and, hit a few isms, but I can maybe play around with it a little bit more. And it's kind of great. I think that's the thing that people, love, especially about Mark Thompson, is that he's so, he has such a facility of doing the voices from the movies, but he also, he's just a good actor himself, and I hope that I'm able to bring that to the books that I read, and that everybody who does read the books are such good actors. Which is what's so great about something like, going back to this. It was too bad that we couldn't do 000, that we couldn't do that book together. That's the one thing that I wish could have happened, because Kevin Scott's book about Palpatine, about
Kevin Scott's
Jedi Lost,
Dooku Jedi Lost, yes,
Jedi Lost, it that we got to do together. So all the actors were in a room with microphones all around and acting with each other, and that is such a tremendous treat, especially for voice actors, because you do everything by yourself, and so when you get to be in a room with other actors, you really get to play off of each other and make each other laugh and do things that, you really get an audience and other players, right? And that's kind of great. You have this beautiful sandbox that you can all kind of play.
It's truly an audio drama at that point. It's more like old school radio play at that point. So
it's really great. I hope we get to do that again soon. Because it was really nice, being able to hear that once it was all put together. But to have been able to meet everybody and do it all together would have been a real treat.
So
it wasn't possible. But.
Who did you play in Jedi Lost?
Oh, I played Sifo Dyas.
You did? Oh my! How did I not know that? All right. This is me totally unprepared. That's amazing, because
I've got to do 3 completely original characters, which is awesome. Sifo Dyas was, briefly, like one line in like a Clone Wars episode, but for the most part, nobody really ever heard his voice before. So I got to play a character, and you got to hear his, this character's dramatic story, play out, in this drama, which was fantastic. I mean, that, I have to say, as much as I love playing the characters that I saw as a kid and that I always wanted to be as a kid, being able to give new voice to new characters is just awesome. And then to be thought of as the voice of that character is, I mean, what, as a Star Wars fan, it just makes me like, almost verklempt. You know what I mean? It's like this idea that like I get to be 000 at least for
Yeah.
a while.
Yeah.
I get to be Jaxxon at least for a while, right? And
Yeah.
and do the sort of first version of these characters is such an unbelievable treat. And I have so many people to thank for it, but also like it's funny how my life seemed to be leading here all along.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just wild.
So how did you approach Jaxxon? Because Jaxxon is like got a weird reputation. Some people love him, some people don't love him. Kevin Scott has been dying to bring him to life, and you took his story to that next level. And so maybe you do a little bit of his voice, maybe tell us how you got to it.
Oh, Jaxxon. Oh, yeah. Well, it's so funny because with Jaxxon, it was one of those things where I was like, well, he's a rabbit. He's a luppy. And I wanted to bring in, the sort of classic, almost animated, because he's this wild animated character. It's almost like, how the Bone books play with these sort of characters in like almost a Lord of the Rings sort of world.
Mm-hmm.
Jaxxon is almost like doing that, this almost Looney Tunes type character in a Star Wars universe. And it's such a beautiful combination of things.
Right.
I love Jaxxon as a character. I'm so glad that Kevin wrote that book, and I'm so glad that I got to play it because, it plays with so many different things that we all are familiar with, right? So,
Right.
You got your Bugs Bunny sort of vibes, or your like, Buster Bunny kind of vibes, about how bunnies talk and, have a little bit of a vague New York accent. And so like, and he's also kind of a wheeler dealer and like, and then how you talk past all those keys. So I started playing with that. And that was one of those things where, as soon as I started doing it, Kevin was like, "That's great." He's like, I don't want to say anything about that. That's what you're gonna do, and and I was like, "This is gonna be really hard to do the entire to read the whole thing like this." But that was like once we live, and it was something that like just came to me. It was like one of those things where I was like, "Well, how does he talk?" And he's got these huge teeth, and of course, like it would do something to the way he speaks. So of course he would speak around it, out the sides of the front teeth. And I just love that about it because, here's this character who wants to be respected, who wants people to take him seriously, right? But he's green. He looks like a rabbit. And I was like, well, then clearly he's going to have a speech impediment as well. Let's give this guy
just pile it on.
Just the trifecta of like, nobody's ever going to take you seriously.
Yeah.
And so he's got to do it for himself. And that, I love that. I love a character that decides, I don't care what the universe throws at me. I'm going to succeed. Right. And I'm going to tell you, this is wild. This is like a weird thing. My father was that type of person, right? My father emigrated here from El Salvador. He started many businesses that went bankrupt or failed, and he had many times that he also succeeded. It was always coming up, but it was always one of those things where it was like, people are always going to think the least of me, and I'm going to surprise them, right? And it's this beautiful idea, and so that's why I want deciding to be an actor. Was something that almost came right out of that belief that that if you wanted it, you could go and do it. You could go and try and be it. And it's hard. Once you put that in, once you try to make that happen, it's hard to make those things happen. It's equal parts luck and seizing opportunity and saying yes to the right things and, saying no to the wrong, the right things too. It's kind of wild, and Jaxxon is a beautiful character. Like Han Solo, he gets every. God, I hope I can swear. I apologize.
Yeah, go for it. Have some fun.
Yeah, he dropped F-bombs everywhere. That guy. But Han Solo gets whatever, and that's what I also love that about the other story, the story about the delivery guy on Hoth.
Yeah. Yep.
I love that. I fell in love with Han Solo as a kid, and of course you would, because he's charismatic and he's, everything kind of goes his way, even though he has kind of a sheepish way of when things don't go his way, right?
Right.
But he's handsome and he's like charismatic and he gets the girl, all these things. But I loved that story. How, and I'm sure Jaxxon feels the same way, right? As that character, that here's this guy who gets whatever he needs because he's tall and handsome, and he's got the big Wookiee next to him, like, and all I've got is this green fur and these gigantic ears and this speech impediment, and so I'm gonna try and sell myself to people.
Yeah.
And I think that's just a great character to latch onto. I was so lucky to have gotten that story, and I'm just I would love a whole book of Jaxxon.
Yeah. Maybe we have to get Disney Plus to make The Adventures of Jaxxon the Leppy and get you to voice it, and then we're there.
Oh my God, that'd be tremendous. I've got a feature coming out on Disney Plus early next year. I can't talk about what it is, but there's a feature coming out on Disney Plus in 2022. Maybe finally somebody will know my name, and we can make that happen. We'll start the wheels turning.
We'll get that go. We got to do a whole hashtag campaign. We'll get it going. Make Jaxxon happen. We'll make this work. It'll work out. That's really great. That's awesome. Well, Sean, I have a 10 question segment of this show where I'm going to throw it. Now, hey, there's no pressure. There's no wrong answers, but I won't judge you, but I can't say that my listeners won't. I mean, that's what I'll put it out there for you. Yeah. All right. So, so we'll go through and then, short answers, long answers, whatever you want to take them. What is your favorite Star Wars movie, TV show, or book?
Well, it's Empire Strikes Back. It always will be. It's fascinating, and my wife's in my argument aside, this idea that George Lucas had, right? And I love all of it. I'm one of those people who I love all of George Lucas's ideas about it. I love the people who he inspired to create their own versions of ideas about it. I love it all, right? But that movie in particular was so well crafted, and the team behind it was so well put together, and it's also it's a story in transition, right? You had the nugget of the original movie, and then you had to take it somewhere. And what do we do? How do we take it there? And here's this incredibly dramatic story where everybody's on the run, nobody's getting anywhere, nobody's getting what they want. The bad guys are winning. And then we're left at the end where we don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's just this beautiful, dramatic thing that left you wanting more.
Yeah.
And I just love that movie. And having been, I was somebody who was hooked from day one on those movies. But that was a beautiful second dose, right?
Yeah.
When I got my second dose of Star Wars, I was, I was gonna be hooked for life.
Yeah, and it's true. It created the 3 longest years of my life between Empire and Jedi. It was just, as a kid, it was an interminable wait trying to get that answer to that question. Yeah. So that's fantastic. So name one actor that you'd like to see in a Star Wars movie.
Oh, an actor I'd love to see in a Star Wars movie.
Yeah. Other than Kenin Elias-Reyes.
Well, yeah. Wow, John C. Reilly would be great.
Yeah.
I think he'd be great in a Star Wars movie. Come on, he was fun in Guardians of the Galaxy. It's
yeah.
Sure. He's already in that galaxy far, far away. He could move to a different one, and we could put him in a Star Wars movie. That'd be tremendous.
I can see that. That would be a great call. I'd love to see that. There it is. All right. So if you could own any critter from Star Wars as a pet, what would you want?
Ooh. Any critter from Star Wars as a pet.
Yes.
Well, I'm gonna have to think about this for a second. It would probably be one of those bird things.
The porg.
Porg.
Yes.
It would definitely be a porg. I mean, come on, that thing looks just so cute. They look vaguely furry, but also feathery. They'd be just those look tremendous. A porg. It would be a porg.
I think a porg's a good call. Yeah, it feels like it's already a pet in a way. It's very
exactly.
All right. So, what is your favorite Star Wars sound effect? There's that Tom Cruise laugh and clap.
My favorite Star Wars sound effect has got to be, and it's not even just a Star Wars sound effect. I try to find it in movies all the time. I've told my kids about it. And of course, because we're in an interview situation, I'm completely blanking on the name. It's the scream. It's the yell.
The Wilhelm scream.
The Wilhelm.
Yes.
That's it. Yeah, the Wilhelm scream. It's the, and I love it. It's just such a great, over the top scream, but it works because sometimes over the top just works. And I love it whenever I hear it. So yeah, it's got to be the Wilhelm scream.
That's great. It's funny. I've asked that question a bunch of times. Nobody said that. That's awesome. But you're right. I mean, you hear it in
strictly Star Wars, though.
Exactly. But that's what's great. To your point, I hadn't thought of it that way. But I always think of Star Wars when I hear it, whether I hear it in Raiders or on some random show on television or something. It's owned by Star Wars now, even though it's
same reason. Whenever I hear it, I've got a bad feeling about this. I can't get away from it. And my family, on a side note, my family hates it when I do this. But whenever anybody in any situation, it's almost like this, this reaction. It's a Pavlovian thing. Somebody says, I don't know, that's impossible. And I'm like, it's not impossible. I used to bullseye womp rats on my T-16 back home. They're much bigger than 3 meters. And they're like, do you have to finish it every time? I'm like, yeah, I kind of do. I kind of have to finish it every time,
You and I went to the same school of family annoyance, because I do the same thing with when somebody says, what I really need is, I say, what I really need is a droid that understands the binary language of moisture evaporators. And it's funny because you have that clip on your website.
I do.
And I was like, I was meant to talk to this guy because
I love, I keep thinking about doing this. I love doing those scenes so much. I almost want to get in a booth and just watch them down and see if I can match it up and just do a Twitch video of me doing all the voices as they come up on the screen. One of these days. It's
funny how there's so much Star Wars, just so much of a memory in it. It's usually the number 10 question, but I'm going to ask it now because we're right here. But what's your favorite Star Wars quote?
Oh, what's my favorite Star Wars quote?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a tough one. Gosh, I wish I'd been able to prepare.
Yeah, I'm not very good at letting my guests prepare for these things. Take your time. I can edit. It's fine.
I'm not even gonna get it. But it's when Han Solo is responding to Luke about the Force.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a lot of things, but I've never seen anything that I'm kind of it's funny. I'm kind of an agnostic. My father and I would always have these. Not even agnostic. I'm full on atheist. But my father would have these. My father and I would have these religious talks, because my father was very agnostic. He was very much it could be everything, it could be nothing,
right?
And he loved to just philosophize. And it's funny. I always saw myself as sort of the sort of realist to his dreamer in this sort of Han Solo kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's got to be that quote. I would say.
It's the hokey religions and ancient weapons are no match for a good blaster at your side, right? Is that it?
Yeah. Yes, that's very close to it. Yeah, very close to it. It's what is it exactly? It's I've seen a lot of things in this galaxy, but I've never seen anything. What is it?
I'm looking up the quote here right now because I want to get it for you.
Yeah.
Where is it? That's the great thing about here.
I'm looking it up too. See who finds it first.
Let me see. Let's see. Oh, I've flown from one side of this galaxy to the other. I've seen a lot of strange stuff, but I've never seen anything to make me believe there's one all-powerful force controlling everything.
That's it. And I feel like many of my conversations with my father would end with that kind of a thing. And then something weird would happen. And I'm like, I'm a big believer in coincidence is just that's what the word means. You know what I mean?
Yep.
but every once in a while, my father would be like, "How do you explain this just happening?" You know what I mean? It's like it would be great. And so I always saw that relationship is almost like an Obi-Wan versus Han Solo kind of relationship with my father.
And it's interesting too, because and that's a great quote, because at the end of the day, that's kind of the heart of the story of Star Wars is, you know, it's, and I don't want to say it's faith and religion, because I don't think it's that, but I think it's that hope, and it's hope in different ways, right? It's hope either in the rebellion, or hope that you can, you know, destroy a Death Star with a lucky shot, or, you know, all those things. So,
No, exactly. I mean, and it's funny because, you know, and look, you know, I've managed to be able to follow my dream, and that's kind of unbelievable in some respects, especially when I consider my 13-year-old self. But my father was one of those people who, gosh, you know, if he, you know, I remember one time we were sitting in an office, and some guy was sitting next to a big trash can, and he had his leg kind of like crossed one leg, and it created this tiny spot between his legs, like this tiny little area between his legs. And my father was like, "All right, if I get this piece of trash through your legs into the trash can, you're gonna buy me a steak." And the guy's like, "All right, whatever." My dad's like 10 feet away. He's like, "Oh, okay, sure." You know, and my father goes like that, and he throws it, and it goes right into the trash can. He's like, "You owe me a steak." And I was like, "How did you do that? How did you just do that?"
Yeah.
You know, he's like, "I'm a believer." You know, like, it's not even saying. I was like, "Okay, you were lucky. It's a lucky shot."
Oh man, see, there's well, then there's the Obi-Wan follow-up quote with in my experience, there's no such thing as luck, right? So it's there's a man. I really am. I am a nerd.
It's a beautiful push and pull, you know.
Yep. Oh, that's great. That's so cool. And again, that's sort of why Star Wars still works it worked for you when you were a kid. It works for my kids. It works for this conversation, because it's got these sort of universal truths or perspectives that, you know, they apply. Sure, there's spaceships and wizards and robots, but there's these sort of underlying sort of ways to look at life, which is so cool.
Yeah.
All right. So the next question is, who is your favorite droid?
Who's my favorite droid? It's got to be R2. You know, he's just so happy and good.
Yeah.
He's the honestly the best, most good character in all the movies, right? He has an unquestionable ethic always to do right. And to put himself in danger, you know, above all else. He never questions it. He's always just going to go. Yeah. And it's kind of an amazing, it's such a great personality trait to give to this thing that doesn't even speak a language. It just beeps, right? This little trash can looking thing goes through the universe like, I'm going to do good. I'm just going to go and do good. Right? Never questions himself, never thinks like, you know, when someone's sad, it's like, are you sad? You know what I mean? It's like, it's such a soulful character. It's really how everyone should try to live their lives. And, you know, we all get stuck in these, like, you know, patterns and these systems, but he's this thing that just kind of keeps going on the right path.
And see, this is why I love doing the show, because I never thought of it that way, but you're 100% right. He's like programmed only to make the right choice, right? Yeah. Regardless of what kind of danger, what kind of he's that part of us that wants to do the right thing, but where you and I might be afraid to do it, he's not. He just does it.
And he's gonna take you along with it, right? It's like you know, if I have to leave you behind in the desert, I'll leave you behind in the desert. But this is the thing I have to do, right? You know, it's unfaltering. It's unflinching, and it's, you know, will literally go off of a cliff. Yeah, believing that something's gonna either catch him or, you know, it's tremendous. It's just such a great a way to live.
Yeah, 100%.
Like R2. What would R2D2 do?
WWR2D2 do. There's the new T-shirt that's coming out next week. Okay, so what's your favorite non-Star Wars movie?
Oh, my favorite non-Star Wars movie. Gosh, I have so many. It's got to be Back to the Future.
Yeah.
As a kid, different movies come to you at different times in your life. And it was one of those movies. My grandmother and I had a tight relationship. My grandmother and I, we went to zoos and museums and, all these crazy places together. And I would spend my summers with her. And she was just this fantastic, she had so much energy. And this one summer we go, I was at her house and we were going to go see a movie. And because we loved seeing movies together. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to see Fletch, I was like a teenager and I really wanted to see Fletch. I loved Chevy Chase. And she's like, she wasn't a huge fan of Chevy Chase. She was like, well, here's this movie, Back to the Future. This is what's funny about the movies that I love are not the movies that I wanted to go see. Star Wars even, it wasn't on my radar. It wasn't that I didn't want to go see it. It was that it wasn't on my radar. But I'll tell you that story in a second. My grandmother was like, well, let's give this one a shot. Let's give this one Back to the Future a shot. It sounds fun. And I was like, oh, okay, it's a time travel movie. It's got this kid. Who cares? And I go and see it. And all of a sudden, I wanted to be Michael J. Fox. Right. I was like, oh my gosh, he's so great. What a great movie. And I fell in love with that world, that universe, and loved all three of those movies as well. So it would definitely be Back to the Future as my outside of the Star Wars universe, with a close second being Raiders of the Lost Ark, right?
Yeah.
So Back to the Future. To go back to the Star Wars story, I saw Star Wars because of a girl.
Oh, really? Really?
I was 5 years old.
Mm-hmm.
She was somebody in my kindergarten class. She lived next door to me, and I had a huge crush on her, and she was going to go see Star Wars. She was telling me about seeing Star Wars with her parents on this Friday night. And so I go home and I tell my parents, hey, I heard about this great movie. It's called Star Wars, and we should go see it at the 8:00 showing on Friday night. That's when we should go see it, right? So that I could be there at the theater, so that at the end of the movie, and I was like, oh, can we sit in the back? So that we could sit in the back. I was making these plans as a 5-year-old.
Very clever.
So at the end of the movie, they're like, okay, let's go. And I'm like, let's just watch the credits, right? And everybody's filing out. Everybody's coming out of the theater. And as she and her family are passing, I was like, oh, hey, oh, you're here. This is crazy. We should go out and get some, we should go get some shakes or something at, the Burger King. And I was making these plans as a 5-year-old.
Brilliant.
To run into a girl, right? And it's just hilarious to me that that started the whole love of this thing. It's just this happenstance. I'm sure I would have seen it eventually and loved it.
Sure.
But the fact that I saw it on opening, on the opening weekend, because this girl recommended it.
That's amazing. And it's funny too, because like you said, it's not to get too philosophical, but you do end up, you make these little choices in life, and it ends up influencing. I mean, you could have seen Star Wars a week later, and it might not have affected you the same, right? It might have been like, oh, that was cool, and then go on to your next thing or whatever. And it, as you said earlier, Star Wars influenced you to make to want to be an actor, to make that big jump and take that risk, and that's pretty wild.
Yeah, it's wild.
And now with this little 5-year-old girl, now she's changed your life.
I'm actually going to talk to her on the phone tomorrow.
So oh, really?
She's still a friend of mine. It's so, and she's a huge Star Wars fan still too. She lives in Kentucky, and we're still in touch.
That's amazing.
It's wild how these things have carried throughout my life. It's like all those things I had when I was 5, I still have some nugget of. That's it. Really, you understand the world as well as you probably should as a kid, right? Things should be fair. Things should be shared. Things should, I want to be a good person. I want to be the hero. You know what I mean? All these little things that you get when you're 5 years old. They're really, let's go that. Let's go.
Yeah, we should just stop learning at 5. Stop. Just right. Well, maybe we should learn stuff, but we should what is your favorite Star Wars collectible?
Ooh, okay. It's going to, right now, my son and I just made, not the $800 one, God, I wish, but the Millennium Falcon Lego set. That was super fun to make. Yeah. And I wasn't a fan of Legos as a kid, but making that Lego set with my son was pretty special. Is that my favorite collectible, though? Oh, no. I made my own Han Solo blaster from Empire Strikes Back.
You did. How did you made it out of?
Now, when I was in my 20s, I was working at a theater in Dallas, Texas, and a friend of mine lived there, and he had gotten this lathe because he wanted to make his own Han Solo blaster, and I was like, oh, gee, I got to get on that. Like, let's do it. And so we bought these replica broom handle Mausers, which is what the Han Solo blaster is based on, and this metal lathe we were going to use to like make the blast, the sort of muzzle and the blast, what is it, the blast muzzle? I can't remember what it's called exactly, but and fashion the scope and all these things. And then I was done doing the show and I left and I hadn't made it. And just a couple of years ago, my kids wanted to go to Comic-Con, and I had already had this Han Solo jacket that I wear every day. It's so funny. And whenever somebody says, that's a really cool jacket, I like that jacket, where'd you get it? And I was like, it's a Han Solo Empire Strikes Back. and they're always like, oh, well, it looks good on you. But so I was like, okay, well, I already have that. So let me try and build the whole costume, and let me finally get this broom handle Mauser made into a blaster. So I have the Han Solo blaster. That's my favorite thing.
That's awesome. That's great. That's really cool. That's very cool. And again, there's so many cool things about Star Wars, and one of them is the fact that your favorite collectible is not something you go buy off the shelf. It's something that it's that's so cool. And it's very personal.
It's funny. I said I didn't like Legos when I was a kid, and that was the reason I didn't like Legos as a kid, is because people would make things out of Legos, and I was always like, no, I want to be a prop maker. You don't understand. I don't want I hated the flimsy like orange original lightsabers. I was
my gosh, it was basically a flashlight with a plastic tube on it. Yeah.
Like the movie, and I was always so angry at costumes that you would buy.
Yeah.
I remember as a kid constantly being disappointed, right? Like they would sell something like, oh, that's cool, and I would go and I'd buy it. I was like, this is cheap. Like, come on, I want the thing that I saw in the movie. And so I would try and build the thing that I saw in the movie. I was always much happier with a real model set that had paints and real plastic pieces that looked like real, that you could like score and paint and burn and do whatever you needed to make it look real.
Yeah.
Then I was ever into Legos, but now my son is hugely into Legos.
Yep.
And now I'm kind of into Legos. It's funny how that worked out.
Legos are. It's funny. I was sort of a Lego fan as a kid, not like super into it. I played with them when I could, but now my son and I we build Lego sets together, which is so much fun, and mostly great. Star Wars. But that's and it's funny too. Like you said, like you want. I think that's an interesting thing about Star Wars and why collecting is such a part of being a Star Wars fan, because you want to own a piece of that universe, which is why. I've gone a little bit crazy with the helmets.
It's awesome.
But it's because I've always wanted to own that sort of piece of Star Wars. And that's something that's, And the hardest part is keeping my 8-year-old out of here and stealing my, Mandalorian helmet and running down the hallway with it. But
that's awesome. Come on.
I mean, at the end of the day, I can't be mad at it. And it is funny too, because from a collectible standpoint, and this isn't generally a collectible podcast, but like I'm now at that point because my son is enjoying this stuff so much that like if I buy a Black Series figure, those $25, 6-inch figures that I want to keep pristine, sometimes I have to buy 2 of them because I want him to be able to rip it open and just play with it. And you know what? He has so much more fun with that than I do with the little box sitting up on the wall. And that's so and that's an entree to Star Wars, which is so important.
It's funny the collector versus the use, like the person who plays with it and uses it to make something, right? I mean, the collectible mentality, I can't deny, is attractive. This idea of having a thing and keeping it pristine and putting it on a shelf, and you have the beautiful in the box and everything. It's never been something that I've been able to embrace or even do. I was always somebody who wanted to open it up, who wanted to take it apart, who wanted to play with it and have it be a thing. And I'm also somebody who I love the history of a thing, right?
Mhm.
I love the fact that a person plays with it and does their thing with it, and then it gets passed on to the next person, and they play with it, and maybe a dent happens, or like in Toy Story, as the different names get scrawled across the bottom. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like there's a beautiful history to that is part of the world, and as much as I respect collecting and totally respect the idea of keeping something beautiful, because if those people didn't, it would those things might not ever exist,
right?
Like in the future to see again.
Yep.
I can't get my brain around that. I want to touch it. I want to play with it. I want to have it. And also there's a part of me that's like, I was gonna go get one of those jackets, one of those Han Solo Hoth jackets from Columbia, and I was standing in line, and it was my birthday, and my wife was like, okay, go get the Hoth jacket. And I was like, all right. And so many, and I was like, maybe I should I get two and resell one? I mean, does that make sense? Should I do that? And so many people were doing that, and I was like, well, clearly they're making good money. I mean, they're going for a lot on eBay, and while I was standing in line, I stood in line for like an hour and a half. No, I'm sorry. It must have been like 2.5 hours, because it didn't open until like 11. I got there at like 7 a.m. There were people who were there all night. There were people who were paid to be in line for other people, right? And as I'm standing there in line waiting to get this thing, I ended up not buying it. And I especially didn't want to get a second one, because I was like, I totally get it. I get that there's this, obviously if you can buy two and then you can sell one for a lot of money, it makes a good business sense to do that. But for me, it's like it's everybody getting a chance to get it. And look, it was an expensive jacket. Not everybody's going to get a chance anyway.
Right.
But like people who were saving up their money for it, who weren't able to get one, I felt kind of bad for them, because then they can't spend $2,000 instead of $350 or $400. They can't spend like $10,000. It's like, and they were going for like these crazy exorbitant amounts of money. And so I was like, as I was standing in line, I was like, yeah, no, and I just left. And it was like, it was one of those moments that I think, it made me really think about, the kind of person that I like to be too. It's like, it's, and again, I'm not judging.
Sure.
I think there is a tremendous amount of respect to be had for people who do collect and I mean, keep things beautiful and on a shelf. And like, I mean, they're the people who like 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, we still get to see the beautiful thing. Right.
Yep.
But yeah, it's just not me, and it's funny how that plays out, I guess.
Well, and I think though that at its heart though too, it's also, I mean, there's collectors and I'd be lying if I didn't say that I have a couple boxes of pops that are still unopened, but those are just, but I have most of my pops are open. But I think it's that point I was making before, is that like you want to own something from the Star Wars universe, so you want it, like even if it's a goofy bobblehead doll, it's you want it. Oh so it's a similar kind of thing. That's great. I think collecting is, and it's different for different people. So
totally. I think that I've seen some beautiful collections that I'm just like, wow. I mean, look behind you. It's a gorgeous backdrop that you have there, but of course it's not necessarily just to be the backdrop of your, this is you've curated this, and it's gorgeous. And it's and that's a fun thing to go and witness as a fan, and so I do appreciate when people do have collections of things, because it always gives me wonder. It's like I'm entering a museum or entering like a little
and part of me as the collector here too, like if you were to come and visit, I would get excitement out of like watching you pick up the helmet and be like, oh, this is awesome, and just that's like that's the thing. And again, it's different things to different people, which is so cool about Star Wars. 2 questions left. One is, if you could own any spaceship or vehicle from the Star Wars universe, and I'm taking the Falcon out of your choices, which would it be?
I'm so bad at remembering things. It's going to have to be the Mandalorian's ship, the
Razor Crest.
The Razor Crest, yes. It's going to have to be that one. That's the most Millennium Falcon-y ship I can find. right? because the thing that's beautiful about the Millennium Falcon is that it's not pristine.
Right.
Right, like when I drove across country with my grandparents in this old Mustang convertible, and it was a shitty Mustang convertible, right? But it was a 64 Mustang. It was a 64 Mustang convertible, and it was just weathered and ready to break down at any moment.
Yep.
And just great.
Yeah.
And so I think that maybe that's what influenced my like sort of the lived in aspect of things, right? And the history that they carry with them.
Yeah.
When you keep something gorgeous, it's almost like it hasn't had the history, right?
Right.
And so yeah, I think a broken down ship that sometimes can really perform is kind of a really cool idea. So it's got to be the Razor Crest. Yeah,
that's cool. And by the way, that's a fun Lego build. If you get a chance to do that one with your son,
yeah.
you should do that one. That's a fun one.
Right.
It's funny. I've told this story before, actually. So I had I mentioned before we got on, I had Hal Hickel on the show. Hal is the visual effects lead for Mandalorian and things like that, and he was on the show. And we were just talking. It might have been even offline before the show, and I was like, Razor Crest is such a great design, I love it. And the next day I watched Mandalorian and watched it get blown up. Spoiler alert, it got blown up. And I had him on a couple months later, and I was like, Hal, I still can't forgive you for letting me get so excited. And he just sat there and nodded. He knew, of course, that tomorrow it's going to blow up, but it was just so much fun because I was like, oh, the design is great. Everything you were just saying, like it's lived in, it feels like it's so Star Wars. He's like, it's great. Yeah,
that's the beauty of it, and I think that's really the beauty of this sort of, this galaxy in the past that's so futuristic, and so futuristic that it's lived in, that it's old, that like this stuff is falling apart, and there's a beauty to that like the sort of like somebody cobbling something together and just get over the finish line, just get me there, by hook or by crook. It's great.
And it's one of the things I think that people, I mean, we all talk about quote unquote, that lived in look, right? But people forget that before 1977, every science fiction film was shiny and clean and white and silver and everything. Yeah. But everyone since then, because then Alien and all those, ever since then, George, once again made this huge change in the way we look at things, and it was so cool.
Yeah.
All right. So the last question is normally what's your favorite quote, but we went through that. What is your favorite Star Wars moment?
My favorite Star Wars moment. Okay. It's I love you, I know. My wife and I can't believe I'm not wearing them right now because of course I took them off and put them on the dresser over there. My wife gave me a leather sort of little bracelety thing that says, hers says mine says I love you and hers says I know.
That's awesome.
Yeah, she got a little engraving on it. We have this. It's kind of great, it's nice when you find somebody who's a great partner, or as my wife says, "I'm your goddamn partner." From Raiders of the Lost Ark, and she's great. She has this, she got me that one year, as a Christmas present, and she got herself a Chewbacca tank top. Right? Because when we drive anywhere, she's always the co-pilot.
That's great.
She gets these little things, and she gets me in that way that like is just kind of great. Very, very, very lucky.
That's fantastic. That's great. And it's such a great moment. And it's to your point, if it allows you to make that direct connection, which is awesome too. So
right.
All right. Well, Sean, before I let you go, I wanted to get you to say a little, this is Sean Kenin, and you're listeing to Around the Galaxy, so I can get a little bumper in there. And maybe if you want to do a second one is like maybe Jaxxon or somebody else, I wouldn't be opposed to that.
So twice.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm Sean Kenin, and this is Around the Galaxy. That's what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Hi, I'm Sean Kenin, and this is Around the Galaxy. but that's about as promo as I could say.
Perfect. There you go.
Hey everybody, this is Sean Kenin Elias-Reyes, and this is Around the Galaxy.
Perfect. I love it. Great. Sean, tell people where they can find you on the interwebs and keep up with you.
Well, you can see me get angry at the MTA on my Twitter feed at Sean Kenin. I always think it's going to be funny things, and then it's always just me angry at the MTA, which couldn't be more classic New York. You can find me. My website is seankenin.com. But I also own a recording studio in New York, Hyperbolic Audio. It's a place where we record a lot of really fun, fantastic stuff. Look for me anywhere. Watch for me in the credits. Sometimes I'm places that you don't even know that you're going to find me. I'm still in obscurity. But when you see me in the credits, write to somebody and say, "I love that guy, that Sean Kenin guy who did the voice in that thing."
He was that guy on the thing. That should be your tagline, Sean Kenin, that guy on the thing. That's right. No, this was great, man. Thank you so much. This was really cool to hear your story, and this was a ton of fun.
Thanks so much. I can't thank you enough for just reaching out. What a great show. I was watching clips before we connected, and I was like, wow, it's always so inspiring when I see people doing such amazing things with their fandom, and it's just so cool the people you've managed to have on the show. I'm very thankful that you asked me to be on the show. Thank you.
Well, the pleasure's all mine. I really appreciate you joining me. So this was really great. Cool.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Be well, sir.
You too.